So what can happen is that when we introduce this leave, if the society is not ready, it can be used against women. That it is a way to discriminate women more because men don't menstruate, therefore we don't have to hire women. Hire men je. You don't have a...
Welcome to the new episode of Athena Effects, the series. In today's episode, we will confront the harsh reality of period poverty. Did you know that in Malaysia, 3 out of 10 low-income women struggle to afford sanitary products? And 1 in every 5 girls in Malaysia have missed school because of menstruation. Today, I have Dr. Fatimah Zahrah with me, a senior lecturer in sociology in IIUM, sorry. I would say that she is the face of Peduli Merah, an organization that combats period poverty. Dr. Fatimah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
What actually inspired you to take up this cause?
Maybe we try to jog through it quickly because the story can be quite long. Actually, one of the monuments of impactful experiences when we were running some projects in downtown KL. So we were distributing food actually for the homeless. And
Like a soup kitchen.
yes, it wasn't part of the soup kitchen. It was actually one of our university initiatives. And during that session, I met with a lady who asked me while I was giving her the food bag, do you have sanitary pads? It took me by surprise a little bit. But of course, understanding that, that would be something that somebody needs, right? That sparked my interest to search up a little bit more on menstrual poverty in Malaysia. I think that was in 2018, 2019. And when I did look for it, I didn't find enough research on it. Or in fact, I did not find any studies specifically in the Malaysian context on period poverty. And even when I looked through newspaper articles or media reports on it, there wasn't a lot that was written on it. In recognizing that it not only does not exist in the research world or lacks a lot of language around menstrual poverty or period poverty, even in terms of awareness and understanding of the society is still lacking. So there's also an element of raising the awareness and educating the people is also part of trying to combat what period poverty is. Yeah.
So it started with one person asking you if you have a pet.
Yeah, because I think as a privileged woman, I have to say, we take it for granted. We don't really think much about it. We always feel like when we need it, we have access to it. But to think that just navigating the monthly period cycle is something already for any girl or woman, right? But having to navigate it without having access to basic things like products or clean water, or even the privacy of a home, right? And when we think about people who live in the streets, that means they don't have a room, they don't have a space. Even if you bought sanitary pads, where are you going to keep it? We buy a packet and then where do we store it if we don't use it? So things like that went through my mind in terms of understanding, access to products not available. Do people know to give it out or not? Yeah.
In this episode, our main objective will be to focus on the significance of menstrual health and how it will affect your dignity and also well-being of a woman, especially. Yeah. So the goal of this episode will be to challenge the cultural and societal stigma associated with periods, and also kita nak tekankan the importance of ensuring that all women and girls have access to menstrual products.
Okay.
Alright. So, doctor, when we talk about period poverty, in my mind, period poverty only exists toward people who are poor. So, is that correct or?
Okay, so even though my story or in terms of what motivated me started with the context of a homeless woman who is of course affected by poverty. When we talk about period poverty, number one, we're not just talking about product poverty, right? We're also talking about the larger context. So when we say menstrual poverty or period poverty, it is when a menstruating person is unable to manage their menstruation healthily and also with dignity.
Oh.
Right. So now we can see, the context is larger. Recently, actually, I went to the Philippines to talk about menstrual poverty. And one of the academics there, Dr. Sabrina, was saying how powerful it is because we use the term poverty after the word period, right? Number one, we put menstruation or period at a public kind of platform, and it sort of empowers or emboldens our effort to address the issue. Number two, when we put the term poverty after it, it grabs the attention of people because it means that it is something that must be solved. It is something that requires attention, and it also requires some form of solution. The term period poverty refers to, number one, of course, an issue of wealth inequality, because when there is poverty or wealth inequality, it will or it may have a higher likelihood that somebody will be affected by it in terms of managing their menstruation. Number two, of course, it is also related to gender inequality, which is related to what you've said just now, issues of stigma relating to age and taboos, and perhaps also maybe some forms of discrimination that affects women who menstruate.
I see. So in relation to Peduli Merah, did you start that organization?
Actually, no. I am just advising for Peduli Merah. So Peduli Merah is an initiative run by a group of young women. So I position at Peduli Merah is to advise Peduli Merah.
But you are the face of it. In a
I
way.
think I became the face of period poverty because of the advocacy work that we've done along the way.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so would you say that you are the first, the pioneer who started this conversation in Malaysia?
I think maybe I brought forward the concept of period poverty, but to say that I was the first person to start, I think it's not fair for all the people that came before me who have done work maybe in their own platforms and where they are. For example, I can highlight there are obviously many grassroots women, especially, who have worked in some ways to combat period poverty. So maybe I think it's fair just now, although I mentioned what period poverty is, but to really sort of define period poverty and to give us a picture of where we can see period poverty, right? So number one, to manage our menstruation, we need products. So product is an important part of it, right? So product is disposable sanitary pad, it could be reusable sanitary pad, it could be menstrual cup, whatever forms of material that we use that is absorbent and safe. And also it can hold the blood enough for a girl or woman to be able to participate in the social world. That means it must be enough for them to be able to go to school. So say school is 6 hours. So they can manage 6 hours using that product. Or they can go to work, right? So sometimes we have people say, why don't people just use kain macam orang dulu? But the problem with using kain perca is that you can't really make sure that it doesn't leak in the span. It's not really absorbent enough, right? So product is one. Second is education. And we must recognize that menstruation doesn't just happen once. At a normal rate, is usually once a month. And it happens for about 30 to 40 years of a woman's life. So it is something that occurs on a monthly basis for a very long time. And the menstruation that women experience and the cycle sort of changes as we go through our life. So making sure that education about menstruation is also age appropriate and timely, recognizing the changes that women go through as they have reproductive years and so on. When we talk about menstrual poverty, sometimes we think that, it's just for young women. We're just thinking about young women, but we're not thinking that the menstruation term is long. Do women know about menopause or perimenopause and the changes that happens? Do they get the right education about it? So that education too is also the second point that's important in thinking about menstrual poverty. The third is facilities relating to it. So meaning that ada tak access to clean water, disposal management. If we use disposable sanitary pad, can we dispose it of safely? Is there sanitation? Can ada hand soap ke tak? So we're thinking not just in people's private spaces. If there is a wash problem, a water sanitation problem, then we know that women and girls are affected. Contohnya kawasan tu memang tak ada access to clean water. So obviously there's going to be some problems there, right? But also thinking about public spaces. Kalau if we go to public toilets, ada tak access to clean water? Boleh tak toilet tu boleh tutup tak? Contohnya, is the door safe? So in thinking about schools, when girls go to school, can they go to the toilet safely? Is there access to clean water? Disposal management, toilets punya rubbish bin macam mana condition dia? And then of course we have access to medical facilities and also services. So contohnya period pain. Is it normal? If you cannot function, do you need medical help? Can you get medical attention? Will you be diagnosed in a timely fashion? Macam tu kan. The our healthcare professionals trained and also updated in terms of research and treatment relating to menstrual pain, for example, kan? So this is another one. And then of course, not being discriminated ataupun not being excluded from society. So this is the other part which is more social cultural in nature. So the political aspect. Do we have good policies in place? Are women being discriminated for having menstruation? Contohnya, are they being excluded from certain events or activities? So that's the other aspect. So you can see the diversity of issues, number one. Number two, who may be affected. There could be a possibility that we're looking at the nation.
Yeah.
Most women, if not all women, are affected somehow. Kan, in terms of access to education, macam tu. So it is about the severity of it and also how we can sort of address it. Macam tu. So in thinking about all of the people who have actually actively support the work of period poverty before me, there would have been a lot of women who have either worked together to distribute sanitary pads or who have worked together to ensure that we have wash facilities. Maybe, yes, I sort of became the face of bringing awareness and sort of gathering it and putting a name to it, that this problem is called period poverty. But in terms of acknowledgement of the work, I think there has been so many people who have worked in some ways through sexual reproductive health education, educating children, educating women. So I wouldn't say that it's just me. I feel like it's not a fair statement lah. A lot of people have done a lot more work than I do, kan?
Okay. Now that you put it that way, again, it sounds like the issue is not within the education itself. It affects the professionals as well. I mean, when you mention something like healthcare facilities, so meaning it could be maybe that healthcare workers are not trained for the, I don't know, the sickness, I guess we can call it, the menstrual pain, because
the conditions.
the conditions, because, well, it's often overlooked. This issue is often overlooked.
So actually there is a Dr. Hana Nazri who's working a lot on the gender pain gap, right? Why women's pain sometimes are not taken seriously or we've not invested as much in terms of research. So there's also groups of people who work on endometriosis. So there are certain conditions relating to menstruation that have not gotten a lot of attention in terms of research and also in terms of diagnosis and also awareness of medical practitioners and also accountability lah. For example, we have heard many stories or lived experiences of women yang pergi klinik bagi tahu ada extreme period pain tapi not responded to properly, not being tested properly contohnya. So these are examples lah that we can see in terms of the menstrual pain too.
I think one story that actually affected me, not exactly affected me, but it sparked my interest to period poverty, is this one Twitter user. She has been going to gynaes and doctors for 15 years, but she has been misdiagnosed for the whole 15 years, only to find out that I think she has endometriosis. But her pain is extreme. I personally don't know how that feels, but my menstrual pain is also, you know, kalau macam first, second day memang tak bangun katil lah. That was before pregnancy. And bila I pergi klinik, will either give me a contraceptive, or they say, oh nanti dah mengandung, dah bersalin, benda tu settle. Which I'm not sure if that's true ke tak lah.
In terms of treatment and diagnosis.
Until I went to one doctor, she actually do macam ultrasound and all, through transvaginal ultrasound. They found out that I have multiple cysts on both of my ovaries. Dia kecil-kecil and it's not growing, but there's a lot. There's like 12 on one side and 15 on the other side. And I have an issue with my mental health. Also, I tak boleh ambil contraceptive. So, I think that is also one of the reason why I banyak research lah, because I pun tak tahu.
Yes, I think also sometimes there is an undermining of women's experiences also, right? And that's where the issue of the gender pain gap. So when women come to say that I'm in pain, will the first responder to accept that and believe that, kan? Ataupun undermine it, kan? In terms of, oh macam dia ni lebih-lebih je.
Ngada-ngada je.
Sometimes can. So I think to be able to believe in people's lived experiences is also a very important part, can. And not to generalize just because most women have menstruation doesn't mean everybody's menstrual experiences are the same. Just because I have period pain doesn't mean my pain and your pain are the same pain, kan. Maybe I ada cramps, tapi you cannot move for 2 days. Somebody else goes through something else. We all have periods and pain, but our pain might not even be the same levels of pain tu, kan.
Like some people just maybe macam sakit perut sikit-sikit macam tu. Like some people literally cannot move. Gitu kan. Ada orang yang sakit belakang, ada orang dia lenguh,
Betul.
macam-macam.
So it's acknowledging and accepting lah that people's lived experiences are true to them, kan, macam tu. And to take that seriously lah when making a diagnosis, and also understanding the treatment process tu lah.
I see. Tadi doktor ada mention pasal like sanitary products. But I pernah baca that sanitary products, like when you want to give out, donate sanitary products, need to think about their access to clean water juga, kan?
Betul.
Like let's say macam if you're going to a place where they don't have access to clean water, what kind of product would you give?
That's very tricky. Sebab to manage menstruation, people need access to clean water regardless of the product sebenarnya, because to clean oneself, you need clean water. So I think clean water is a very basic kind of need. That's why we know that clean water is a basic need for everybody, kan, for sanitation orang kata. But some products require more water than others, kan. Contohnya when we say reusable cloth pads, in order to reuse it, we must make sure that we can wash it in a clean way. So cloth pads versus menstrual cup, it would take less water to clean a menstrual cup than a cloth pad, right? In the same way, disposable sanitary pads and a menstrual cup, macam tu. So there are different contexts would require different solutions, and also to think about not just the solution itself, but also the potential consequences ataupun repercussion of the solution in potentially creating another problem lah. Contohnya in thinking about the environment, mungkin we think that disposable sanitary pad tak use a lot of water in terms of usage for the individual woman. Tapi the disposal of it too sometimes can cause environmental harm that of course will affect everybody lah, kan.
It's not exactly environmental friendly.
Not exactly. It is not environmental friendly lah, kan, disposable sanitary as it is now, unless we come up with new inventions around it or innovations around it. That's why I always say the problem of period poverty and product innovation especially is the stigma and taboo around it. Sebenarnya it's a big market. Half the population are women, and if we menstruate for about 30 to 40 years of our lives, we are using the products. So it's a big market already. It's just that it's very silent, and also it seems it's not very innovative lah, kan. I always use
that one thing.
I always use this example lah, kan, macam to exaggerate the situation is to say we can go to the moon, but our sanitary pads still look the same, right? We haven't innovated. Why haven't we done better? We know so many women complain about comfort. We know so many women are uncomfortable, but really the innovation has been apa je? Buat apa? Wing tak wing. But in terms
reusable tak reusable tu je.
Yes, kan, in terms of sustainability, in terms of comfort for women, in terms of giving women and girls more access to comfortable social life, we have not been very innovative on it because we don't take it seriously. That's where the gender inequality happens, kan. Even though there are interests, there's market interest in it sebenarnya, kan. And it's a ready market. Ramai je orang akan consume the products that you have. But in terms of innovation tu, it seems a bit lazy lah to say it macam bluntly lah, macam kenapa tak ada real form of innovation or creativity macam tu.
I see. I think when we're talking about innovation kan, yang I nampak is that scented pad. When I used to wear pads when I was in school apa semua, I would avoid scented pad because memang gatal.
There's a lot of problems with the idea of a scented pad, right? Number one, of course, we know that macam people from the scientific community and also doctors often discourage us to use scented sanitary because of fragrance, kan, and the harm that fragrances have. Number one. Number two, it is why do we want it to be scented, right? So the taboo and stigma around smell and women's natural body odors ataupun type of liquid macam tu kan, it's like there is some stigma around that. Kan? Why does it have to be scented? So I think there is a lot of conversation actually to be had as to why does it need to be, the innovation is to make it scented.
Kan? If it's macam I pernah jumpa satu yang jenis it's herbal. It claims to macam to flush out discharge the unhealthy ones lah, but I tak pernah cuba. But if it actually works, then maybe that one is acceptable, but the scented one I still tak faham sampai sekarang. Moving on to the next point, when we talk about period poverty and the policy, pernah dulu that someone actually suggested that we have the menstrual leave. Tapi masa tu ramai yang tak nak. And most of them yang tak nak tu is lelaki lah. But in your own opinion, do you think menstrual leave is something that is important?
I think that menstrual leave is important, but I feel like in terms of talking about policy, we must recognize that policy is unique to the context. And also the effectiveness of the policy is in its implementation. Kadang-kadang we can come up with a really sophisticated policy, we can get it to pass, tapi when we implement it, sometimes it creates problems. So the context must be ready to accept the policy and for the policy implementation to happen. So I can give an example why I say this. Contohnya kan, in our current context, when we say menstrual leave, so we're talking about the context of work. Number one, and then we're thinking about making sure that women have access to and which they need because they are in pain, therefore they cannot work. So the humane thing is to give them leave from work and not to punish them for being in pain, which is not their fault. But when we introduce menstrual leave, we have questions like who's going to pay for the leave? Who's going to have to undertake this? Is it the employer? Is it government? Macam tu. And how do we ensure that it is just macam tu? That's why there's a lot of tension around like nak bagi leave ke tak nak bagi leave. So what can happen is that when we introduce this leave, if the society is not ready, it can be used against women. That it is a way to discriminate women more because men don't menstruate, therefore we don't have to hire women. Hire men je. You don't have a problem of giving them maternity leave lah, apalah. So it's difficult to hire women because women are problematic. That's when the society is not ready. Also, we cannot recognize that we have different people of different gender that requires different needs and their contribution to society are both important despite their differences, and to celebrate those differences and to accommodate to that. But if we cannot see that, that's why the introduction of a menstrual leave policy may mean more discrimination against women. So it must be that we follow it with advocacy, awareness, and also to ensure that the system is ready to accommodate to that. Because we know menstrual leave that has been implemented in other societies have meant that women have not abused it. Kadang-kadang ada orang takut ada issue of abuse semua tu kan. So we know, so for example, context of Indonesia and Korea and some other countries yang ada introduce menstrual leave, performance is actually better at work. Women who work in those kind of environment feel supported, so it doesn't have macam negative repercussions in terms of productivity lah contohnya kan. But if it's not ready, people are not ready for it, then we don't know what the outcomes are and whether or not employers will actually provide the leave or not to their employees.
Maybe in Malaysia, instead of giving leave, bagi work from home.
Yeah.
So that you are more comfortable. You boleh buat sambil baring ke.
Yes, I feel like even if it's not a policy, employers out of their own ability to think should accommodate to it, right? In being flexible to people's needs, because employees are also human beings, right? I feel like we must recognize we all live together in this world, and treating one another in a fair and humane way should be a very basic standard lah kan. And if people are in pain, it must be recognized that how can we accommodate to one another in some ways, because if we are acknowledged for our pain and we know that people are taking care of us, our response would be that we would work harder, right? That we recognize that we are being appreciated, and also that our pain is acknowledged, that we would not repay it with abusing the system contohnya, or abusing our employer. I think that kind of understanding between two parties, the employer and the employee tu, has benefits to it lebih lah daripada have a distrust with each other kan. Even if tak ada policy pun at the national level, if you are an employer, I rasa you boleh je accommodate to it, right? And I'm sure a lot of employees do accommodate, and a lot of macam superiors do understand. So to have some empathy lah towards each each other.
Patut balik sikit to the economical context. I think I pernah baca somewhere that the high birth rate in the poor community is due to the fact that they cannot afford sanitary product. How is it related exactly?
Privilege is not just material privilege. Bukannya kita ada material lebih duit, contohnya kita ada kerja ke apa, but it's also to understand certain unique context sometimes push people to behave in a certain way, to think in a certain way. And if we don't take time to think about it, to sort of empathize ataupun to understand the context, we cannot understand why people behave in a certain way. Contohnya some of the examples that we have, I think there was a time ni dia macam viral sikit kan, cerita yang macam orang pilih untuk beranak daripada beli pad kan, and there's all these comments on social media saying like having children is more expensive, tak tahu kena hantar, nak jaga anak lagi mahal and all of that. I think what that lacks is that lens of empathy and recognizing the situation, and it's always not simple. Dia bukan macam tak ada duit lah bulan ni, beranak lah, macam tu kan, mengandung lah. It's not like that. It's to understand that human lives are complex and also context tu penting. So contohnya some of the examples that we've heard from are not of urban context. So they are not urban. Memang in urban area everything is money oriented and it is expensive to raise children. And you nak kena ada diaper, you nak kena beli makanan, you nak kena hantar anak pergi sekolah and all of that. The way that we live in the urban area, raising children is indeed more expensive than purchasing sanitary pad. And access to contraception is maybe easier also for people who live in urban. But the context that we've heard from our NGO friends that report of these cases, sebenarnya context rural, remote areas yang mana raising children, sometimes children don't go to school, right? And they maybe ada more space to grow their own food, and children help with around the house and also in taking care of the family. So the understanding of children and the understanding of life is a bit different.
I see.
So satu, generally women do not have a comprehensive understanding of contraception and the role of contraception. Number two is also the position of women and girls in the society. To go to school contohnya, pads cost around RM1. For example, in the context of Sabah Sarawak, it's more expensive than in the context of Peninsular Malaysia. And then to get the pads to remote areas, dia jadi lagi mahal. Do you send your kid at RM1 a day untuk dia pergi sekolah saja, or do you think that you want to use the RM1 for something else? And in the same way, some of the women say, when I'm pregnant, everybody celebrates me because I'm bringing life to the world, as opposed to if I am asking for money every month to buy sanitary pad. And then also the fear of rejecting the husband. Bila the husband nak ada relations dengan dia, dia takut nak cakap no, dia rasa bersalah untuk cakap no. They don't practice good family planning juga. And then of course, children is very welcome in the rural context kan, lagi ramai anak, you have more resources juga kiranya, because you're not spending so much money per se when you have kids. So the context to really give a different picture as to why you need a sanitary pad, or do you want to have a life that is more welcoming, macam tu.
I see. So it's not exactly that they cannot afford sanitary products, so instead of period, so they stop for 9 months.
Yeah,
something
I feel like it is too simplistic lah untuk kita katakan tak nak beli pad therefore beranak je. And I feel like we also don't macam we cannot be empathetic to people's situation juga, to think that macam tu je people make decision, tak nak beli pad beranak lah, macam tu kan. So I feel like we must understand also what are the forces around it juga.
I see. So in this context, it means that to them having children, it helps them in a longer term.
Yeah, because children is orang kata social punya support kan. In the modern context, we live quite individualistic lives. That's why in the urban context, we have more conversations around growing old and taking care of ourselves kan. But in the rural context, it's very communal. We are always together. We don't really separate ourselves. Kita live in extended families. In the urban context, rumah-rumah kita pun do not accommodate for us to live in extended. We live with our small nuclear families. But in the rural context, we can have community. So we are all the social capitals for each other. We are taking care of each other. So the more or the bigger our family is, the bigger our pool is of resources, of being able to care for each other. So dia punya konteks tu sangat berbeza in the rural.
I
And
see.
yeah, so having children is you growing your family, which is good.
Okay, faham. Patut faham. I confused juga masa tu, because I baca macam I have the idea that tapi ada anak tu macam lagi susah. Sebab pada I macam okay, to try to empathize, I fikir macam maybe at that point of time dia memang tak boleh nak beli. So that's the short term solution. But the long term is,
But we've heard some cases of women who have taken extreme actions bila tak boleh beli sanitary pads.
Which is?
There was a case also that was shared on social media of a lady who chose not to eat. Dia macam sort of starve herself ataupun disrupt dia punya food intake sebab dia tahu bila dia tak eat properly, dia punya period tak datang.
Oh, wow.
So bila period tak datang, dia tak payah beli pad. At the time, she was really challenged financially. So that was the solution that she took. Because period and menstruation is such a taboo topic, women keep it hidden. Jadi kita tak tahu what kind of solutions ataupun actions that people have taken to solve their problems. For example, macam contoh-contoh dekat kawasan rural remote areas in Sabah, we've heard of guna socks lama letak sabut kelapa. Gitu kan. So what kind of solutions do women and girls take bila dia tak ada access to pads? We don't know that because it's so hidden. Unless women are willing to come out and share their stories. While what I said earlier about the context is important juga, but what you said is also important because we don't know bila in the case of desperation, orang buat apa. And orang malu because society teaches us to be embarrassed. So instead of asking for help, we may come out with solutions that maybe it's not fathomable untuk orang biasa. Desperation sometimes forces us to do things that we maybe don't want to do ataupun it doesn't seem logical at the time.
I see. So something that might not sound logical to us is logical to them.
At the time lah sebab desperation kan. Macam
because they're desperate.
and thinking about if you starve yourself, there are going to be other repercussions juga. Tapi memang you tak tahu nak buat apa. Right?
Faham? Okay. Speaking of the unsafe alternative, during your time with Peduli Merah and all, have you met them? Someone who actually used the extreme alternative?
So actually, the lady that shared about starving too, I didn't get to see her. I was actually on a session with her one time, but also we've gone to kawasan PPR also to understand what are the contexts of period poverty there. Kita pun ada pergi kawasan orang asli juga, but we also have macam NGO friends that maybe I personally tak pergi tengok, tapi they report back to us and share with us their context. So it's really unique to the situation. Say for example, in the urban context, maybe access to sanitary pads is not so difficult. Tapi with financial constraint tu ada kesusahan sikit. So bukanlah tak ada pads langsung. So we've talked to young girls yang masih bersekolah lagi. They don't have access to enough sanitary pads. So we know that women and girls need about 4 to 6 pads a day. Kan? Yep. Tapi mungkin mampu beli 1 je. 2 je. Dalam keadaan susah, kadang-kadang kita buat benda kita tak perasan pun. Kita tak tahu bahawa benda tu this is not good enough. Contohnya kan, sama juga macam food. When we eat unhealthy food, tapi that's all we can afford. Tapi kalau kita tak tahu pun, kita makan je. It's only to understand that actually I've never eaten vegetables ke, tak pernah makan buah apple. Sebab satu buah apple RM4. You cannot afford it, right? Kan nak makan, you know what I mean? Macam tu lah. So the girls that I spoke to cakap, mak akan beli 1 paket pad yang besar untuk sebulan. So we will share with our siblings.
That's like
so kita akan kongsi adik-beradik. Siapa tak dapat, nasib lah. But the because they're children also, they're teenagers, they just think it's innocent. Like, well, it's too bad I didn't get it this month. Macam tu, dia gelak-gelak je. Dia tak ada pun macam, I'm so sad I tak ada pad. So we must understand that sometimes it doesn't click yet. That actually I deserve this. This is my right. Tapi my parents cannot afford it. So the context is, okay, siapa cepat dia dapat.
Siapa period dulu untung
macam tu kan. It's too bad I didn't get it this month. Macam tu. So those are some examples lah yang kita mungkin bila kita tanya dia, pad ada tak? Ada. The first questions that we ask, kita tak akan nampak yang dia tak cukup pad, dia tak ada pad.
Kita tanya ada ke tak?
Kita upon further questioning and asking and also asking them to share the stories, then kita boleh nampak where the gaps are. Kalau rural, remote areas, access to water selalu the problem. Tak ada clean water at all. So the water tu kita boleh tengok sendiri. It's really dirty. It's really brown macam tu kan.
Ada yang macam kopi O.
Kan. So in thinking about keeping ourselves clean and ensuring that the hygiene aspect is taken care of pun, kita boleh nampak ada gaps dekat situ.
I see. Okay, now that we have already focused on the rural area, how about the urban area? Does period poverty ada dalam urban area?
Of course, macam just like poverty in general, the context of urban area, kita ada urban poverty. Kan? Ataupun kita ada panggil what you call pockets of poverty.
Miskin bandar.
Miskin bandar. Kan? And pockets of poverty ni maybe some groups of people who are more marginalized ataupun vulnerable than other people. Macam tadi at the beginning kita cakap pasal homeless women. So they live in the urban context juga. Tapi they are affected by period poverty in a more severe context. Sebab dia tak ada access to a house, so tak ada toilet, financially challenged juga, so tak ada access to pads macam tu, ability to go to the clinic ke tak, boleh ke tak pergi macam tu. So these are different ways. Sama juga in the urban context, we have refugee women, or maybe they don't have access to language, they tak ada access to medical services, education. So for example, growing up as a refugee girl, tak boleh pergi sekolah contohnya, mak pun tak pandai cakap bahasa Melayu, tak tolong doktor pun tak tahu nak pergi mana, kena bayar, tak ada duit contohnya. So they are affected by it in a different way. Walaupun they live in bandar, sometimes berjiran je dengan kita, but the lives that they have and the experience that they have are different. So the context tu berbeza, or the wider community, macam everyday children or women who maybe not have access to proper education. Walaupun contohnya kita ada syllabus sekolah dalam buku sains, semua ada cerita pasal period, tapi do girls and women get the right education and timely for them to understand their cycle, benda tu accessible ke tidak kepada dia.
I think in context of education, masa saya belajar bio dulu pun, the only thing dalam the textbook is that the cycle. Itu pun it didn't mention that there are some people who don't have regular cycle or longer cycle, or maybe macam orang yang sebulan period 2 kali, or the sickness macam endometriosis where you shed a lot
of blood,
like PCOS, semua tu something that we can change lah kan.
Can improve. And also when we talk to the girls in one of our research tu, they feel that what they learn in class is not connected to them. Macam belajar ni sebagai an academic macam academic aspect, but I cannot relate that to me. So I didn't benefit from that. Macam I understand, there is a cycle, but what does a cycle mean? Whether or not children boleh faham and how it relates to them. So the practicality and usefulness of that knowledge beyond exams tu is a mystery to the children. Itu one of our findings which is interesting. Bukan nak kata kerajaan salah tak ajar ke apa ke. Everybody had a responsibility to teach children, contohnya when we talk about children. Tapi whether or not they are ready to learn and how we teach them relates to how they understand their world and their life, it's also important.
In this issue, what are the emotional and psychological effects towards people who are in period poverty?
I feel like sebenarnya study on the psychological impact and emotional impact of period poverty ni is a very understudied. We've not really done a lot of studies on it, and because I don't work in the realm of psychology, I pun tak do specific research on period poverty and impact on psychological well-being, but there are studies from abroad yang look into anxiety and depression relating to period poverty. But we know that macam contohnya in the social context where there is shame relating to period, ada embarrassment. Kita tahu from our research, boys still make fun of girls when it comes to menstruation in school. Contohnya pasal bocor, pasal kau period macam tu kan, making fun of that. And I feel like that comes from the lack of education that boys get. So we tend to only teach girls about periods, but we don't teach boys and men in a proper, healthy, safe environment. So we grow a set of boys yang mungkin on one side they don't know how to navigate. Mungkin dia tak actively try to embarrass women, dia tak actively try to discriminate women, ke dia tak make fun of women, tapi dia pun tak tahu dia kena buat apa. And dia pun rasa macam, this is not my space, I'm not allowed to come into this space because it's girl space. The other example was the example before, like yang main-mainkan contohnya, tapi because that's what they learn, that's what they used to. There is not enough of socialization to encourage men and boys to come into the space to support women. Kan? Macam how do you navigate that? That's also missing. And when that's missing, everybody's sort of awkward ataupun dismissive atau discriminatory lah kan. The impact on women, sometimes we hold it inside of us. Malu, ada this feeling of shame of being dirty, and it continues with us until we adults contohnya. And just think about it, even when women go into corporate sector ke, jadi managers ke, if dia ada leakage, dia akan buat apa?
Dia lari dulu.
Yes, how is she going to be perceived? Will she be perceived, this is a normal thing that happens to women, ataupun it's going to be something that she is embarrassed for it, macam tu. But she is having a period. Why do we hide it? It's because we fear that if it is known, then we are considered of a lower position, ataupun kita dirty ke. So those types of things really do affect how we feel about ourselves while we are menstruating. And if something happens to us, sama juga kalau ada leak. So one of the things that girls are most scared of is kalau bocor. And kalau orang nampak kita bocor. So there are also some studies on this, that sometimes girls tak pergi sekolah sebab bocor, malu nanti digelakkan orang, macam tu.
I see. I think the cultural norm. Doktor pernah dengar tak pasal macam kalau you tengah period, you tak boleh pergi petik buah ke? Kalau macam macam nenek I selalu dia kalau nak suruh petik daun kari. Jadi dia tanya dulu, period tak period? Kalau period, tak boleh pergi petik, nanti pokok tu mati.
Oh, I didn't know. No, I didn't. That's the first time. Yeah.
Dia selalu cakap macam tu sebab macam kata kalau orang tengah period ni, dia macam darah dia panas. Tak tahu lah orang dulu-dulu kan. So and I think orang dulu-dulu punya mindset pun instill the feeling of shame, the embarrassment,
relating to dirty ataupun harmful, macam tu.
Macam pet tak boleh buang macam tu je. Supposedly kita memang kena buang macam tu je kan, because it's biohazard. Tapi orang suruh basuh.
There's a lot of things to say about this actually.
Yeah. And I nampak your story pasal tu kan. In my case, masa I pakai pad dulu, I just keluarkan dia punya kapas tu. Sebab I fikir nanti kita nak buang kat tong sampah, kita tong sampah kan share semua orang. So macam nanti kan kotor ke apa ke, takut berulat kan. So macam kita buang kapas tu dah. Tapi kalau macam dekat public, ada juga orang yang still basuh dekat public kan. The reality is that you don't need to wash kan. You just need to wrap.
We need to dispose it kan. That's why tadi kita cakap pasal disposal management tu. Can we dispose it safely or not kan? There's a lot of problems relating to throwing pads in the toilet kan. Sebab apa? Because disposable sanitary pads are not designed to be washed kan. It's not designed for us to wash it and rinse it. And when we try to do that, often we create more problems lah kan. Some are made of macam jelly tu, some are made of cotton, and those things sometimes cannot be flushed down, sometimes causes blockage dekat drains. And this is a big problem sebab kita ramai, kalau kita semua nak basuh pad and the pad that we use are not designed to do that. That's why I said when we talk about innovation kan, we're not thinking about this. Padahal maybe a lot of women think they need to wash pads. Why don't we change the design of the pads to make it be able to be washed? Contohnya lah kalau kita nak sangat basuh pad kan, tapi kita tak buat pun. But the pads is actually enough for us to dispose it. Sebenarnya we just roll it, dispose it properly. As long as it's disposed properly, it doesn't macam cause harm ke, then it should be okay. Tapi kita tak buat pun macam tu kan. We're not taught to do that. One of our findings from one of our research tu problematic juga sebab geli. These girls, dia belajar kena basuh pad, tapi dia pun geli. Sebab semua orang cakap darah tu kotor. Jadi like the thinking is I have to wash it but it's dirty, so I don't want to touch it. So dia buat apa? Dia macam buang je lah. Ataupun pijak sebab tak nak pegang, guna tangan, guna kaki. So pad tu pecah juga. So still creates a problem.
I buat macam tu.
So dia macam it's one problem added to another problem, added to another problem lah kan. So there's just a lot of stigma around it. Satu. And to address the stigma tu, kita tak buat proactive and also educational punya material, tapi kita find solutions that creates more problem lah kan. Taboo around periods ni banyak, and also cultural norms. One of the interesting things that I found is that sometimes kita ada shared norms juga yang maybe have passed through different communities. Contohnya, I heard this one time when I was doing my research, pad tu masa first period, girls have to put the pad on their face supaya tak berjerawat.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah,
And I thought that was very strange because I had never heard of it. Lepas tu, recently when I went to the Philippines, I heard that they have the same dulu punya cultural norm yang similar. So I thought, apparently this is a shared norm that has cut across. Maksudnya walaupun kita berjiran lah kan kiranya in terms of countries, but these types of taboos and norms ada. Sometimes of cultural norms yang based off maybe certain alternative beliefs ke macam tu kan. But we don't really talk about it kan, and we don't really unpack it. What is it and why do we say it macam tu, and whether we can understand what is the evidence behind it. Apa kena mengena lap pad dekat muka dengan jerawat contohnya kan, where do jerawat come from. But I feel fortunate lah, kita dah hidup dalam zaman yang we have more access to information. So we have opportunity to teach the younger generation, and they also can be more empowered to look for evidence-based solutions lah. But we have to empower them to like, if you hear something, check dulu, verify, is this correct ke tak kan, where does it come from.
Jangan ikut je.
Jangan ikut je. And I feel the younger generation are better at this kan. They are more willing to check and verify first. And hopefully this is what we pass down to the next generation lah. Check dulu kan, jangan ikut je macam tu.
Okay, just now Doctor ada mention about boys. Either they don't know what to do or they make fun of them. Well, you're with Peduli Merah, right? How do you tackle that issue? Specifically towards boys.
I think with Peduli Merah actually, I want to say last year kot, or the year before that, we actually had one program with Buku Jalanan Caukit, where we did one session with the children. And we included boys during the session. But outside of Peduli Merah pun, I have always worked alongside men and also always feel that men need to be brought into the conversations. Just nak bagi contoh yang program dengan Buku Jalanan Caukit tu, it was really helpful. Generally, I don't do a lot of this work with children, but during that session, I learned a lot as a researcher and also an advocate for period poverty. Bila I nampak that boys are very inquisitive and their curiosity too is very valid, and in understanding the situation, they are able to empathize better. Contohnya, there was this one boy, dia nak tahu pad tu rupa dia macam mana, and how do we put it on. So kita tunjuk lah, we brought pads, and then kita show macam mana pad tu letak, and then dia macam, oh tapi tak selesa lah kan. So I think in recognizing that, you can understand that your sister, your mom ke, your auntie ke, they are in a state of discomfort. So it creates a understanding and empathy that, oh okay, daripada kita macam, jangan tengok pad, jangan pegang pad, macam tu kan. It's we hide it from them, but actually them knowing has a good outcome juga. Sama juga in talking about period poverty, it's not just a women's conversation sahaja. Of course it affects women, tapi the solution cannot just come from women, and it cannot be just that women yang apply the solutions. It must be that something we understand together. Sama juga tadi kita cakap menstrual pain. Men are often superiors ataupun they take a higher position usually, or they are put in positions of higher places in society. So they often have to take care of other women who are under their care. So if they don't understand, it's difficult. So it's either they don't know what to say, or they just like keep it hidden je. Dia pun, okay lah apa-apa, I don't want to hear the word contohnya kan. And through my work, I've met a lot of men who sometimes are fearful of using any word. Dia takkan cakap, dia cakap yang tu. Maksudnya dia tak boleh sebut perkataan period sebab dia pun takut it's going to be disrespectful. Ataupun dia cakap, minta maaf doktor, saya cakap sebab they feel like they cannot say it in a safe way, and also not in a way that makes me feel dignified. So how do we teach men and boys to use the language that is correct, and how do they have conversations with us around it, or to support us, kan? Because we don't live in separate worlds, kan? It's either we are siblings, ataupun kita jadi bapa, kita jadi suami. It's always that we're always connected to one another, kan? So we cannot distance men from the conversation, kan? But to include boys and men, they must have good knowledge and education juga. So tak boleh tak educate diorang. Kena juga educate boys, teach them. But it doesn't mean that kita hajar sekali. I think this is one of the things that I try to break juga. Teaching about periods, whether it is to girls or boys, is not a one-time program. Dia bukan macam, oh dekat sekolah pernah ada satu program macam tu. Ataupun bila saya period, mak saya pernah cakap sekali. Kan? There's that very awkward conversation that girls have with their moms once their whole life. Kan, padahal bila nak menopause, tiba-tiba we are alone. We don't know who do we talk to. Contohnya kan, can I go back to my mom to ask her about it?
Kalau mak ada lagi.
Ataupun do I talk to my friends? Kan, or is it taboo? Kan, taboo around menopause and perimenopause is even worse than periods. Kan, nowadays we have a lot of period empowerment punya conversations, but we don't really talk about perimenopause and menopause.
I think there's 3 pre-menopause. Dia ada menopause, and then perimenopause and premenopause.
Yeah, maksudnya experiences or periods that come before the menopause. Bila dah start some symptoms before menopause.
Apa beza 3 tu? Like menopause meaning dah berhenti lah.
Dah end. Perimenopause tu bila dah ada some symptoms that menopause is approaching. And macam perimenopausal symptoms can happen like 10 to 15 years before the menopause. So lamanya. And imagine if you don't know what's happening to your body, kan, when women have hot flashes, macam what is happening to me, the hormonal changes that happens. So if menopause age is about 50, perimenopause can happen at late 30s, 40s. So it feels like, why am I
I dah almost 30.
why am I experiencing this? Kan? And the taboo around menopause and its position around femininity sometimes affects whether we're ready to talk about it. Kan? Macam if you, I don't know, sometimes it's social context jugalah. Kan masa kita kecil, bila kita period, we talk about siapa dapat period dulu. Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it has to do with I've become a woman now. Right? But the conversations around menopause sometimes is opposite. You have lost your femininity when you arrive at menopause.
Kau dah tua.
Or sometimes it's also related to your value as a woman. That you can no longer reproduce and so on. So dia ada taboo dia dekat situ of that age group kan, of women who are in their mid-adulthood macam tu. So how they experience life and whether or not they have access to support, have access to getting help juga, have access to community kan. When we are young, kita boleh sema-sema dengan kawan-kawan kita, right? Girls have this strong ability to communicate with one another. The friendship that girls create sometimes become a support for them. Bila start your first period, you share with your friends, so you exchange notes ke, you gossip ke about things kan, and that creates support. But in the menopause sometimes it's very lonely sebab you malu nak cakap you dah menopause or you dah experience menopausal symptoms macam tu.
In Peduli Merah Initiative, do you support the menopause community as well?
We have not worked on menopausal communities yet. I always felt that at the beginning we just need to raise awareness on what is period poverty, right? And then to support also the agenda of period poverty and ensure that as a society kita faham period poverty tu apa, and it's not limited to pets. I think that was important. In the last few years, we've worked a lot more on highlighting the issue of menstrual pain. So I think we've done it sort of in stages.
Oh, I see. Okay. To conclude, how can society actually support the Peduli Merah Initiative or maybe try to combat period poverty as a society?
There's actually a lot of things that we can do.
But the simplest one. The simplest one.
I said number one, if we understand period poverty properly, we can recognize also where we are in our life and the positions that we hold in our life. Then we can start there. Contohnya, you can understand that, okay, contohnya I'm a girl. I understand that this is what period poverty is. And in understanding period poverty, the first person that I can help is myself. In educating myself, in ensuring that I know what I need, what is my menstrual cycle, advocating for myself. Contohnya lah, I go to school and my school door tak boleh tutup, toilet door. The first thing I can do is to try to highlight that issue to my parents, contohnya my teachers. But in thinking about bigger, I am an adult woman. I'm also in design. So I have the opportunity to do more. Sama juga, if I am a female, I'm a policy maker. Then the responsibility is more on you to do more. Gitu kan? Like for me, I'm an academic and researcher. So I take on the responsibility to do more in terms of buat more research on this. So we can always do things at our capacity and thinking about what kind of capacities that we have. Sama juga orang lelaki. At least first educate yourself on understanding what is a period and then try to have healthy conversations with women around you in understanding their situation, applying empathy more, in trying to understand what does my wife need, contohnya, ataupun what does my sisters need. Taking a step back sebelum kita buat judgement, contohnya kan. But if you have a higher level of authority and capacity, then you should do more. But generally, as a society, I think we have slowly moved and progressed beyond awareness. So I feel like in the last 5 years, a lot of the work on period poverty have been raising awareness. But I think we are almost ready to now, okay, we should start pushing for changes. How can we ensure that timely education tu boleh sampai dekat the right target groups? What kind of initiatives are we doing? So maybe some groups of people focus on adolescent children to talk about what is period. Tapi maybe another group of women now working on, in their smaller groups, educating each other about menopause and perimenopause contohnya. And at the same time, in terms of making sure that everybody has access to clean water. Kan? I think this is something that we can do at the national level, that making sure that access to clean water is at 100%. Because it doesn't just benefit period poverty, but everything. Sanitation, semua tu.
Nak makan pun.
Kan?
Makan minum pun.
So, I think some things memang kena ada changes now because we recognize that, okay, period poverty involves all of these points. Therefore, kita boleh address in these matters. And not to simplify the problem. Because I think some of the lessons that we can learn from other countries is that giving out free pads is not the solution to period poverty. It addresses one aspect, which is some people cannot access to product. Therefore, we provide the product. And sometimes these are short-term punya solution, sometimes it may be a longer term but only for some communities and not others. Kan? Because we know even when we talk about poverty, it's sometimes not just the same people who are poor. Kadang-kadang it's dynamic. Some people get out of poverty, a new person comes into poverty, macam tu. So there is some dynamic changes there. Tapi giving out free pads does not solve period poverty. It addresses one aspect of period poverty. So kita jangan simplify the problem and then kita lupakan dia.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. Thank you, Dr. Fatimah,
Thank
for
you so
joining me. I mean, I myself learned a lot today. Banyak benda I tak tahu. Now I dah tahu.
Thank you also for sharing your experiences. Because when we talk to each other, we always learn from one another. Can as a person who experienced menstruation, you have a unique lived experience juga. That through sharing, I learned something new juga. Kan? I feel like maybe the note is, number one, we all have a responsibility to support the initiative of the period parity, which is the opposite of period poverty, ensure that everybody has access to managing their menstruation in a safe and dignified manner. So we do our part, and it's not a one-day solution ataupun 1 year. It is a lifelong issue that affects women in general. So if we can all play our part, we make the world a better place, and we help women go through menstruation in a more dignified and safe way.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Fatimah. So that concludes our episode for today. We'll see you next one. Bye.